Hello everyone and welcome to today's session. Uh, we'll wait 5 minutes more, see if more people join, and then we'll start the session. It is 5 minutes now. I think we should start our session. So, Welcome all to today's session, which is the session for assignment 9, week 9 for the subject urban governance and development management. We'll be solving the question paper from the previous run of week 9 of previous run of this course, and we'll be seeing how you can approach the questions, how you can solve them, what background information you require to solve the questions. I won't be telling you answers to the questions, as our questions in the previous runs are the same as our questions in the current run. So I won't be giving out answers, but I'll be telling you how to approach the questions, how to answer the question, and what background material you need to uh, know in order to solve the questions. Okay. So this is week 9 of lectures. So this would be from lecture 41 to 45. So I'll just give a brief. So going back to my presentation, so I'll just give a brief introduction to what all has been covered this week. So first you would have covered centrally sponsored programs and schemes, under which you would have gotten basic concept of what centrally sponsored programs and schemes are, and how they are interrelated with the different levels of governance, how they are implemented, how the funding is done, and all of those things. And then you would have gotten a brief introduction of various ongoing programs and schemes which are there currently, and just a little bit introduction to different programs, what they are for, how they are funded, how they are introduced in by the state and at the local level, all of that. Then you would have studied about Amrut. Amrut is one such centrally sponsored program. So you would have gotten detailed information and introduction about Amrut, what the scheme is about, how it functions, how the funding for Amrut is secured. All of that you would have studied in that lecture. Then you would have gotten a brief introduction to smart city concept and mission. So in this lecture you would have gotten to know the background of what smart cities are, how smart cities are defined, what's the concept, how do we understand a city to be smart city, what are the conceptual frameworks associated to calling a smart city, and whatever goes into making a smart city. And then you would have gotten a little bit of how Indian context of smart cities is there, how we how what are the functions we consider important for smart cities, how we consider a city to be smart city. And then you would have seen a little bit of comparison of the world context of smart cities. So how Indian context varies from the world context, what are the differences or what are the commonalities, all of that. Then you would have studied in the fourth lecture Swachh Bharat Mission and Hriday. So these are another two centrally sponsored programs and schemes which you would have studied in and then you would have studied PMAY and NULM. So Swachh Bharat Mission is for solid waste management and other cleanliness management, which you know. Hriday is for heritage and other infrastructure development within the city. PMAY is for housing, affordable housing for all, and NULM is urban livelihood mission. So these four are four different kinds of programs which are centrally sponsored. So by introduction of you would have been introduced to these programs, you would have been given an overview of how what all these programs are, how they function, what are their functions in the cities, and how their mission components align with each other, or how they are carried out, how their funding is secured, all of this. So all of this would have given you a background on how centrally sponsored programs and schemes in India function, how they function at the local level, how their functioning and coordination is done at the state and national levels, and what functions they actually perform. Okay, going on, we'll start with our questions. So, first question today is the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, which is PMAY. It is a mission to achieve housing for all HFA by 2022. Is it a true or a false statement? Okay, so few key things which you need to see in this. First is PMAY. So you need to make sure if the full form of PMAY given in the question is correct or not. So that will that can tell you it's if it's uh, if the statement is true or false. And next you would see what it says about the mission. So does the PMAY mission aim to achieve housing for all or not? So this you would have studied while studying the PMAY mission. So you must know, uh, as in the name only, which is Awas Yojana, it caters to housing. It largely it focuses on catering housing to the lower income group and economically weaker sections. So they are the groups which are the most vulnerable when you consider housing, are uh, who are the groups which largely lack proper housing and services related to housing. So PMAY actually focuses largely on that group, but that is because the other groups which are better economically, they can largely take care of their housing needs, or getting affordable housing for their income group. So in that sense, you can say that yes, PMAY, which focuses on housing affordability for the two sections which cannot do it for themselves. So yes, it does cater to housing for all. And then the third component of this question is the year. So you again need to pay attention to which year they are mentioning. So was the mission's aim, which is to achieve housing for all, was it to be completed by 2022, or was it to be completed by another year? You need to see that. So I have provided you the link to two websites. First is the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana website. You can go and see. Uh, and then there is PMAY-U, which is PMAY Urban. So related largely to urban. So whenever such questions come which talk about the program, so specifically the program name and what its mission is, and by when the mission is supposed to be completed, the key step which you need to take is, or how to solve this question is, you go to the program website. So if you Google, I have provided the links to you here, but what you can do is you can just Google the program website and you can visit there. So usually on the program, I hope you can see the tab. I have gone to the program website tab. Uh, can anyone just indicate if they can see the tab? Sanika, can you tell me if you can see the tab? You can just type in the in call messages or the message box, and I'll get to know. Okay, okay. And let's go back. So whenever you visit the program website, there will be several sections in which you can see they've given a brief overview of what PMAY is, what affordable renting housing complexes are, and all of that. So you can see here in their own website by themselves, they write the particulars of the program. So as you can see, they've written the mission, what the mission addresses. So you can see here if the mission addresses what we are asked in the question or not. And then you can see here by which year the mission focuses on completing its objectives, or the mission. So all such components you can get from the website. or the program mission statement and all of that. See this website, which is PMAYU Urban. In here also you see details of several different programs, what they are. For example, this is the affordable housing partnership houses, then this is institute slum redevelopment. So if you go into the detail, here also you can get the details of all the different programs. So whenever such kind of question comes, you just go to the program website and you see what the program is about. Apart from this, you would also have studied about this program in your lectures, and I am sure based on that you can easily tell if this is a true or a false statement. Okay, going on to the next question, which is the government. It is again a true or false question. So the statement is the government of India introduced a subsidized housing scheme for plantation workers in 1966. So again, the same components you have to pay attention to. First, it says it's introduce a subsidized housing scheme for plantation. So you can search this, and then you need to pay attention on the year. So you would have studied the history of housing, various housing, affordable housing interventions or different housing schemes throughout through India, and this is the larger timeline which you would have studied. So in this timeline itself, you can see various years, and in which year or from which year to which year different programs they were established. So if you pay attention to this timeline, you can see when which kind of programs, or which specifically which programs were introduced in which year, and using this you can solve this question. Another thing which you can do is you can see how low income housing uh, like strategies for low income housing or housing affordability, how it has evolved in India throughout time. So this is another uh, paper which I've provided to you for this question as a reference material. So I've provided the link to you, so you can directly go to the link and see. This is a paper done by IIHS, which is Indian Institute for Human Settlements. So it was done for the Indian Urban Conference 2011, and it is basically a background paper for revisiting upgrading low income housing and infrastructure in India. So it provides a review of various policies and perspectives for low income housing in India throughout history, like after independence. See, from the executive summary only, you can see that this paper looks at the evolution of housing policy, particularly for low income groups, from the time of independence to present day. What you will find useful in this paper is that they have these boxes which have provided a gist of all the programs and policies which came throughout time, and it has presented the gist in very meticulous and very easily perceptible way. So you can see it is divided into three sections. First is the approach of all the housing programs, then what were the initiatives which were taken throughout this period, and what were the limitations of all these initiatives. So from this, all these boxes which are given throughout this paper, you can see clearly which initiatives were introduced when, and other aspects relating to them. So you can see there are housing policy initiatives from the 50s and 60s. You can see what different initiatives were introduced then. Then there are housing policy initiatives from 70s and 80s. So you can see all the different initiatives here, what were the approach which was followed and what was the limitation. And then again you can see the third chunk, which is post liberalization of 1991. So I hope you already know what liberalization era schemes, and you can see the approach which was used by the housing policies or affordable housing policies then, and what were the different initiatives which were introduced, and again limitations of these initiatives as well. So again, based on your based on this timeline, and again this paper which I've shared with you, I hope you can easily solve this question. So pay attention to the scheme they are talking about, and then also the year which they are talking about. These are the two key components in solving this question. Okay, moving on to the next question, which is, so this is kind of related to the previous question, the third question, because it again talks about evolution of various government programs, or basically the Indian government's involvement in housing sector in the previous 6 decades. So again, this paper would also be a great help to you if you want to answer this question again, because it helps you see how the role of government has changed. But what the three key points which this question mentions is the change of Indian government's involvement from provider to enabler to facilitator. So I'll tell you how these three roles are different, and what key features you can see for each of the role, which can help you decide if that program, if any particular program, or if the program of any particular period is related to which kind of role, or how the roles differ. Okay, so first we'll see what provider is. So provider, as you can it's easily perceptible from the term itself, it means provision of something. So the dominant role of the government in this would be the role of provider. So it would provide something. So what it would provide is housings, as we are talking about housing sector here. So housing would be can be provided two ways. So it can either be provided as constructed housing, or in the form of subsidies, housing subsidies which can be provided. So what key thing here uh, is to see here is, first the provider would be the public body, which is the government, and second, the cost of provision of the housing, it would be borne by the public body itself. So it so you see these days there are a lot of private sector involvement. There are PPP schemes are which help enable the financing of the housing sector. But the initial role, which is the role of the provider, there was no participation of the private sector, and all of the cost of provision of housing and housing subsidies was borne by the public body itself. So in that way, the public body itself is acting as the provider of all the housing and the subsidies. So some projects which are like key examples of such kind of role of government. There are projects like slum projects of slum rehabilitation, then finished housing projects. So government would construct certain finished housing and then distribute it to people of low income and EWS groups which can't afford a housing for themselves. And then there would be price controls on, like you can see price controls on land, and then to influence the price control of construction. So government also introduced several regulation controlling the cost of construction, cost of materials, etc. So these are some examples in which the public body or the government, it acts as a provider. The second is the role of enabler. So in this it shifts a little bit from the provider. So government is not doing all the heavy lifting. It shifts its role, and it it involves a little bit of private sector participation into the housing sector. So instead of you can say, instead of providing constructed housing, it goes on to cost recovery, and then instead of providing direct subsidies, it introduces schemes like cross subsidization. So some private sector partner can be involved, and they can bear the larger cost of funding the construction of houses, and then subsidy uh, and funding the subsidies which are provided to the lower income groups. They can be borne by either the private player or the higher income groups and such. So that is which you can see as the role of enabler. So some projects which are common example of this role are in situ upgradation of slums. You can see you would know about the projects of in situ slum upgradation and rehabilitation, in which the land on which the slum is located, the land is used as a resource, and some part of the land is then sold to a private player, or it's sold for development of uh, HIG and MIG housing. So that is high income group and medium income group housing. So for those housing, the cost of housing is more than usual, and that is for the private player to get profit from those housing, and the profit which comes from that housing, that profit is then used to subsidize the housing for EWS and LIG. Again, a chunk of that land which is being developed, that some chunk of land is kept aside for development of EWS and LIG housing, and the profit from MIG and HIG is then used for funding the housing of EWS and LIG. So such kind of projects you can see, which are examples of the enabler. Another key aspect of this role you would see, which is the introduction of housing finance sector. So as soon as you involve a private sector participation, or private sector participation, as soon as you involve, and then there are people, you shift uh, the burden of bearing the cost of constructing new housing and all of that on private sector and the end user themselves, then you have to introduce some sort of housing finance intervention into it, because in the end the housing, like the cost of provision of this housing is not being borne by the public sector. So as soon as the private sector and the end user is involved, there has to be some sort of housing finance institutions which have to be involved, so that they can streamline how the housing finance is provided to all these people, or it can also ensure that it can be accessed by all groups. So even the low income and economically weaker section. Okay, so that is the role of enabler. And then coming back to facilitator, so this is the last kind of role of the government which Indian government has played. So in this, earlier there was introduction of some role of private sector, and in this case the larger role in housing development and housing finance is given to the private sector. So the government only plays a role of a sort of a role of seeing how the programs are being sort of a regulator role. So it doesn't play an active part in the facilitation of housing or facilitation of subsidies. It just acts as a role of a regulator, and it devolves responsibility. So in the earlier two, in the first, the housing, the provision of funding was largely taken care of by the central government, and then when the role of enabler came, the power started devolving from the central government to the state government and a little bit to the ULB. When you talk of the role of facilitator, all of the power, all of the responsibilities of housing and poverty alleviation, they are devolved to the urban local bodies. So if you talk about the facilitator, you see programs like JNNURM, you see PMAY, all of these programs, they have the ULB as the body which is taking care of all the responsibilities of housing and poverty alleviation, like programs of poverty alleviation like NULM and such. So the ULB is the body which is taking care of the program on the local level. So the state and center, they only take care as a regulatory body of how the funds are devolved and how the funds are being used, but all of the responsibility of housing provision and poverty alleviation, they are devolved to the ULB. So this is another feature you would see when you see uh, the role of Indian government as facilitator. And another key factor you'll see here is, as I said, the government acts as a regulator of the projects. So one key area of this regulation is that instead of several piecemeal projects, what is does is it tries to integrate all the piecemeal projects into one uh, comprehensive and coordinated project, or uh, more than one coordinated project. So it tries to align all of the different function of different piecemeal projects so that one comprehensive program can be introduced which can take care of several different functions related to housing and poverty alleviation. Okay, I hope this uh, clarifies to you what different kinds of role here are, here we are talking about, which is provider, enabler and facilitator. And going back to this timeline, you can see for yourself the different programs and how the role of government has changed based on this definition or this uh, elaboration of what each role looks like. Okay, uh, we'll move on to the next question, which is in the context of low income housing finance, the term CRGFS stands for what? Okay, so this term CRGFS, it basically talks of a scheme for low income housing finance. So I'll give you some hints on what the full form of this term is, so that you can uh, reach your answer, like you can get closer to your answer. I'll just provide a few hints. I won't give you the answer to this question, but I'll provide you a few hints of what scheme this question is talking about. So the scheme this question is talking about, it was introduced in 2012 and it was in pursuance of the Rajiv Awas Yojana then. So it is now PMAY, as you all know, the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. Then it was called Rajiv Awas Yojana, and the scheme was introduced in pursuance of Rajiv Awas Yojana. It was introduced by the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs in after June 2011. So what this scheme did was it enabled the creation of risk guarantee fund for low income housing loans. So it was what this scheme focused on was to facilitate credit enablement for urban poor. So as you know that urban poor, they usually don't have uh, large large or valuable properties which can be given as collateral for availing loans for their housing, or development of their housing, or construction of their housing. So to facilitate that, this scheme was introduced. So the key principle for this scheme was that the lender, which would be some bank, they can secure housing construction or upgradation purely on the assets which is being financed. So the asset that is being financed is the housing, which is either being constructed or being upgraded. So based solely on that particular asset without any additional collateral from the borrowing person, which is belonging to a low income group, the bank would provide a housing loan for the construction of their house. So I've also given uh, websites of two banks here. You can visit these websites and see details of the scheme. So you can see details of the scheme here, and you can get a little more idea on what these schemes are. So first is the scheme details for Bank of Baroda, and then this is the scheme details for the National Housing Bank. So you can see that uh, in your own time, and you can see what this scheme entails, what are the different components, and I'm sure that will help you to know what this term stands for, and it will help to answer this question. Moving on to the next question, which is the primary source of data to list all slums for strategy for slum redevelopment using land as a resource is what? So this question basically is asking you about where you can avail the data which is related to slum the strategy for slum redevelopment using land as a resource. So it provides you several options. First is Google Earth database, State GIS database, Bhuvan portal, and Census of India 2011. So first of all, it is essential to know what kind of resource data you would need for this program. So as the program is strategy for slum development using land as a resource, so it is talking about in situ slum redevelopment, which we talked about earlier. So I've provided the website link again for this program. You can visit the website here, and you can see what are the key aspects of this program. And one thing you need to pay attention is that it is in situ slum redevelopment. So it means the program needs to the slum redevelopment will occur in the place where the slum is located. So what we need here is data of where the site is located, and then how the program is progressing. So for that we need geotag database. So what this question is talking about is basically it is an application which is developed by ISRO, and this application facilitates location based services to geotag the location and other data related to that slum redevelopment project, and it helps in monitoring the construction stage of house under the scheme. So if you go back to the website, you can see here there are several options of various elements related to this project, and you can see this here. So this is actually the dashboard of the geo platform designed by ISRO, which we are talking about, and I think it is very clear from this dashboard which application we are talking about. And you can see here uh, this is the dashboard which can give you details of if you put in the name of the beneficiary who is getting fund by this project and their details, you can see what what date it was geotagged, what is the construction of stage of that project, and you can even see photos of that project. So I suggest that you visit this website in your own time and you see what are the different components of this application. Coming back to our presentation. So I hope this question is clear to you, and you can now select which the correct option for this data source is. We'll move on to the next question. So next question is, Dash is the premier organization for facilitating funding and technical expertise in the field of urban infrastructure and housing in India. So it gives you four different institutions, and it's asking you which is the premier organization among these institutions which facilitates funding and technical expertise for urban infrastructure. So I'll give you a brief introduction to what these different institutions are and what their role is, and based on that I think you'll be able to tell which is the correct answer for this question. So first is HDFC. So HDFC is Housing Development Finance Corporation. So it is basically an Indian banking and financial services company. Next is HUDCO, which is Housing and Urban Development Corporation. So HUDCO is a public sector company, and it comes under the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. So, and it is a key partner of Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and it helps the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs in several different projects. So what it says on its website is that it's a key partner in building assets for the nation. So assets, it is it's talking about the different infrastructures and services which are developed by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. And one key area which HUDCO looks at is development of affordable housing for EWS and LIG groups. Next is NHB, which is National Housing Bank. So National Housing Bank is actually an apex regulatory body. So its function is the regulation and licensing of housing finance companies in India. So all the housing finance companies which are there in India, they are regulated by NHB. And this bank, NHB, is under the jurisdiction of Ministry of Finance. Next is IDBI. So IDBI is Industrial Development Bank of India, and it is again a development finance institution. It provides various financial services to the industrial sector. So specifically to the industrial sector, not housing, not any other sector, but specifically to the industrial sector. It is a subsidiary of LIC, which Life Insurance Corporation of India, and it's owned jointly by the LIC and Ministry of Finance. So these are the various organizations which we are talking about in this question. I also encourage you to go to the website of each organization. You can easily Google it and find it online, and you can see what their functions are, and based on that you can easily answer if this particular organization, does it help facilitating funding and technical expertise for urban infrastructure or not. So based on that, I think you can easily solve this question. Moving on to the next one. This question talks about SAAP and SLIP. So the question is, in the context of State Annual Action Plan (SAAP) and Service Level Improvement Plan, which is SLIP, identify the correct statements from the following. So SAAP and SLIP are part of Amrut scheme, as you might have studied in the lecture covering the Amrut scheme. So the funding for the Amrut scheme is basically provided based on the SAAP and SLIP documents. So in a way you can say that SLIP is a subset of SAAP because SAAP is developed by the state, SLIP is developed by the urban local body, and uh, going back. Okay, and SAAP is actually an amalgamation of different service level improvement plans provided by different ULB. Uh, so you can what one thing you can do to solve this question is you can take a look at the strategic steps which are followed in the preparation of both SLIP and SAAP, which can help you solve this question. So uh, for SLIP is prepared by the ULB, and it is prepared for uh, communicating the information about different service level improvements which need to be made. So first, what is done is the gap is assessed. So what is the gap in the service provision uh, in comparison to the service level which is set. So then the second step is uh, you see options how to bridge the gap. Then you examine the alternatives. What are the different alternatives which can be used to bridge the gap, and which is the best alternative. And then you estimate the cost based on which kind of alternative you've chosen, how large the gap is, and what are the initiatives which need to be taken in order to bridge the gap. Then you prioritize among various service level gaps. You prioritize which gaps are the first should be fulfilled first, uh, and among those options you choose. And then there is out of box thinking. So in this you focus on some even after prioritizing some aspects, you choose to focus on some other aspects, like you can focus on environmental protection, you can focus on building urban resilience. So there can be some aspect which the ULB has decided to focus on for the local level, and based on that you can further uh, change or improve your priorities as you prioritize earlier. Then comes conditionality. So for bridging the gap, do you have the prerequisites available with you? So like if to develop a project, do you have land available? Do you have resources available? If not, can they be accessed with the funding which you are asking for? Such things are seen. Then comes resilience. So for any project, you have to see if the project which you are deciding to build, will it be resilient to various conditions like wear and tear, with resilience to climate impacts, all of those things. Then you see, can it be financed, what financing options you need, how it can be financed, what amount of finance you would be needing, all of those things. And then you see reforms. So there might be some existing schemes and projects already which are catering to this specific service which you are talking about. So what reforms you need in that program or scheme, that is to be assessed. So these are all the strategic steps which are taken to develop SLIP by the ULP. And after development of this SLIP, this is sent to the state for development of the SAAP. So after receiving all SLIPs, what the state does is, so it see you can see from the step, it does not need to assess the gap or examine the alternatives or see the cost and all of that, because that is has been done by the UL. So what the state does is it takes the SLIPs from different states, and then it prioritizes. So which services or which gaps need to be fulfilled first. Then it sees the operation and maintenance of different aspects of various projects, and then it sees the financing options for various projects which are available. So based on all of this, the SAAP is prepared, and then it is sent for approval to the center. And once the approval is granted, the funds for the project are granted to the state, and then state further grants the funds to ULBs for various uh, parts of the project. Okay, I hope this explains to you what an SAAP is, how it is prepared, and what an SLIP is, how that is prepared, and I hope it can help you answer this question. So, which of the following statements are correct and which are not? We'll move on to the last question for today, which is identify the fundamental pillars of a smart city from the following. And you're given 6 options: social infrastructure, institutional infrastructure, economic infrastructure, industrial infrastructure, physical infrastructure, and environmental infrastructure. So first thing right away you can do here is you can see if some of these infrastructure which they've mentioned are they a subset of already, are they already a subset of other options which are mentioned. For example, if you see environmental infrastructure can either be a subset of physical or social infrastructure. So this option you can take a look at if this is correct or not, because if you select social infrastructure and physical infrastructure, you're already including environmental infrastructure. Then again, industrial infrastructure, it forms a different part, so it can be a part of a city system, or it also not, it doesn't necessarily have to be part of a city infrastructure. But whatever industrial infrastructure is part of a city infrastructure, it comes under physical infrastructure. So again, this also is a subset of physical infrastructure. So while you're choosing physical infrastructure, you're obviously choosing things as like roads, bridges, uh, other built environment. Also industrial infrastructure, it comes as a part of physical infrastructure. So I think this part of the question is clear. Now we focus on another element, which is the fundamental pillars of smart city. So you would have seen this diagram associated to the pillars of smart city. So when you talk of pillars of smart city, what it talks of is basic infrastructure, and which we've seen from the options, and what these infrastructure need to help us achieve is these uh, elements which are essential for development of the city. So these elements are quality of life, employment opportunities, economic activities, and investment opportunities. So you go back here, and again you see the options. Do these options help you achieve these development objectives for the city? Do they or do they not? That can help you answer this question. One other element which you can take into consideration while answering this question is you can see what core infrastructure elements we consider as we like in the Indian context we consider part of city smart city infrastructure. Uh, just give me a moment. Okay. Okay. So coming back, so one another way you can answer this question is you can look at the core infrastructure elements, which in the context of Indian smart cities, they are considered as part of the infrastructure element which a smart city has. So we have adequate water supply, assured electricity supply, sanitation and SWMM, urban mobility and transport, affordable housing, IT connectivity and digitalization, good governance, sustainable environment, safety, health and security of citizens, and health and education. So you can see each of these infrastructure elements and then relate it to the infrastructure elements which are mentioned in this option, and you can see if these are being covered or not. For example, adequate water supply. So water supply would come under physical infrastructure. Electricity supply again would come under physical infrastructure. Sanitation as WMM, again physical infrastructure. Urban mobility and transport, again physical infrastructure. Affordable housing, physical infrastructure, plus some social infrastructure as well. So not only affordable housing, but even sanitation, SWMM, all these come a little bit under social infrastructure as well. Then IT connectivity, digitalization, again physical infrastructure. Then good governance comes under social infrastructure and institutional infrastructure. Uh, then sustainable environment, it can come under social infrastructure or even physical infrastructure. Then safety and security of citizens, it can be covered by in social infrastructure, physical infrastructure, and things. And then health and education. So these are again covered by social infrastructure. So from this also you can see which options from this question uh, uh, qualify as fundamental pillars of a smart city. So I hope it this clarifies to you what how these questions are to be approached and what background information you need to solve these questions. Uh, so I'll take any doubts if you have. You can just type your doubts in the message box and I can get to them. Anyone? We have three members present today, Rahul, Vamsi, and Azizur Rahim. If any one of you has any doubts, please ask. Yes, Rahul, please, you've raised a hand. Please ask your question. You can just type it in the messages. What is the difference between subsidy and cross subsidy? Okay, so I explained this to you, I think, in this question when we were discussing the different roles of provider, enabler, and facilitator. So you see, when you talk of the role of government as a provider, you see they're providing subsidies. And when you talk of the role as enabler, you see there is cross subsidies or cross subsidization. So what subsidy basically is that government directly provides the uh, the beneficiary. So the government directly provides the beneficiary some sort of compensation or some sort of economic help if they choose to construct their houses using that scheme. While in crops subsidization, as I gave you the example of in situ application, the government doesn't directly provide the beneficiary some economic, like some amount or some sort of compensation for building their house. What it does, it's in effect is, for example, in case of in situ upgradation, it uh, upgradation, in case of upgradation of the slum, the whole land on which the slum is located is used as a resource. So that resource is then given to a private player who constructs housing on that. So in order to make the project financially viable, uh, the private player has to make some profit off of the housing project. So what the private player does is the private player makes housing obviously to house the already slum population which were living there. So it makes LIG and EWS housing for that population, and apart from that, in the same plot of land, it also makes HIG and MIG housing. So it takes its share of the profit from MIG and HIG for all to fund the construction of the project. Another thing it does is from that profit, it also funds the construction of the LIG and EWS units. So in this way, the government, as you can see, it's not directly paying subsidies or covering the financing costs of any construction, but it's subsidizing the LIG and EWS through by using their land as a resource. So it's providing them subsidized housing, but it is not providing the subsidy by its own resources, but it is using the land on which the slums are located as a resource, and using that to subsidize their housing. So this is one example of cross subsidization, which I hope is clear to you. So subsidies is when the subsidy provider, which is usually the government, it provides the subsidy directly to the beneficiary, and cross subsidization is when the government involves another third party into it, and with the help of third party, some profit is created, which is helped to provide the subsidies to the beneficiary, and the subsidy is not provided by the government directly. I hope it is clear to you. Uh, any more questions? If anyone has, please type in the comment, the messages. I think someone else also raised their hand. If you have any question, please ask. No doubts. Uh, Azizur Rahim, do you have any doubts? Okay, no doubts. Okay, I think Rahul, do you have any more doubts, or can we close the session for today? Okay. So we'll close the session for today. We are open. We are still open to any doubts. If you have, even after the session, you can just ask them in the forum, and we'll get to them. So, but this is all for today's session. Thank you for attending today's session, and we'll see you in the next session for week 10 next Tuesday. Thank you all for attending.